All right, thank you all for coming. Welcome to the Fieldwork and Research Abroad workshop. My name is Varun. I'm a third-year CURBS ambassador, and this is...
And I'm a first-year CURBS ambassador.
And so we're gonna get started.
So researching abroad can be beneficial for many reasons, and obviously there's some that might be catered more towards you personally, but some general ones would be adding diversity in scientific knowledge and ideas, fostering a sense of global collaboration, diplomacy between countries, allowing for ability to investigate unique cultures, experiences, and environments, providing access to facilities that may not be available here at UF or even in the United States at all, and it enables a greater global perspective.
Yeah, and so some things to keep in mind when researching abroad is that it's a diverse country, and it's a diverse experience. So one thing to remember is there's this term called helicopter research, when essentially researchers from higher socioeconomic status carry out research in areas with lower socioeconomic status. And there's some things that you may not seem obvious to, or you might forget. So it's sometimes failing to acknowledge that the contributions of the local community and already existing researchers there. So it's just something to keep in mind that if you're going for research abroad, that you might be in a different status than other people there. And some other obvious ones are language barriers, political and social climates, and then cultural differences. So just keep these things in mind if you do choose to do research abroad.
And there's a ton of opportunities for undergraduate students to become involved in research abroad. The more notable one is REUs. And typically REUs host around 10 undergraduate students for a research program at a host institution. And some of these that you can find are abroad. They usually happen over the summer, and they can be directed at underrepresented minorities and people without much research experience, or directed at undergraduates who have already had research experience. It kind of just depends on what kind of program you're looking for. And I think there's a workshop hosted on our YouTube if you want to learn more about RUs in general. And then sometimes they're also funded by NSF, universities, or other organizations. And then some examples of current international RU opportunities are the Imagine Scholars Program in Asia, and then the international RU programs, which change annually. So there's a whole list on their website. But examples include Michigan's RU in physics in Geneva, Switzerland, and then Texas A&M for tropical studies in Costa Rica, and more.
Yeah, so there's also opportunities in research after you graduate. So they're not just limited to undergraduate experiences. And so one of the biggest ones is the Fulbright Scholarship. And it expands your perspective by allowing you to have cross-cultural dialogue. And one of the most notable things about the Fulbright Scholarship is that you actually get to design your own project, and the application would consist of a proposal abstract, a description of how you plan to engage your host country through a personal statement, also a letter of support from contacts within your desired host country, and information about what you plan to do upon returning to the United States. And so this is really geared towards people who are just finishing their bachelor's degree, master's degree, or their graduate education. And then another big one is the DAAD research grant. And so this is one of the world's largest funding organizations for the international exchange of students. And so these research grants are given to highly qualified students, and they're mainly for people who have completed a master's degree or a bachelor's degree by the time they receive the grant. And these experiences can vary. They can be long-term, short-term, or even summer experiences that you conduct in Germany.
And then for some background information on what fieldwork is, it's a process of observing and collecting data about people, culture, and natural environments. It's usually conducted outside of the laboratory setting, which allows researchers to collect dynamic data about their intended research populations. Fieldwork can transcend across a variety of disciplines, and it's an important part of the research process for both social and natural sciences. So some examples might be biologists and chemists may want to focus on physical characteristics of an ecosystem. Anthropologists may want to conduct ethnographic research to describe the customs of different cultures. Evolutionary psychologists may want to study the behaviors of animals to make inferences about human behavior. Climate change activists might want to investigate how healthy coral reef systems operate. there's a ton of different examples of fieldwork research, and they're really prevalent in research abroad opportunities.
And so better to talk about it than us is Miss LeBlanc, and she'll give her own presentation right now. You can come with that.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Megan LeBlanc and I'm a graduate student here at UF in the Department of Anthropology. Is everyone semi-familiar with anthropology? I'm getting nonsense. Okay, awesome. So then I won't bore you with all the details of what that is, but specifically I'm an archaeologist. I've been at UF now for a lot of years. I won't exactly disclose how many, but I am currently ABD, which is all but dissertation. And so that basically means that I started off doing my master's research, completed that, wrote my thesis. Then I did my exams for my doctoral program, completed those, and right now I'm in the writing stage of my dissertation. And so, like I said, specifically, I'm an archaeologist, and so I do a lot of field work. I enjoy lab work as well, but nothing is quite the same as actually being in the field, actually digging up artifacts, and being able to interact with like history on a very personal level. So specifically, I work on the south coast of Peru, and I focus on different events related to climate and specifically natural disasters. So I'm going to go a little bit into not only my background as an undergraduate student, where I did some field work and research, but then talk about my experiences specifically at UF. And then at the end, I guess you guys will go back to a presentation and then we can have some questions. Okay. Sounds good. Oops, that did not change slides. Oh, there it goes. So like I said, all of my field work that I've actually done overseas has been in southern Peru. I've done a little bit of field work in the States as well. But after I did my first field school in undergrad in Peru, I kind of got sucked in. And so since then, that is my favorite place to do field work. So I started off as an undergrad at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas. And while I was there, I got introduced to the field of anthropology and specifically got hooked on archaeology. TCU is a pretty small liberal arts college, and so there weren't as many research opportunities specifically in the anthropology department because we were so small. So in order to do some research, I actually had to go outside of the university and look for other opportunities for fieldwork. And I'll talk a little bit more about the Institute for Fieldwork at the end of my presentation, but it was a program that was not through TCU, but was something that I had to find on my own. So this is me at my first field school, probably around the same age as most of you guys. And it was specifically done in Chincha, Peru. It's not quite as far in southern Peru as the current research that I do, but it's pretty close to the coast. And that's when I realized that I wanted to continue doing field work in Peru, as well as I wanted to continue in the field of archaeology. And so especially if any of you guys are anthropology majors and are interested in doing field work, it is a really good idea to be able to get into the field, because you might get there and be like, oh, I hate working here. I want to work in the lab. Like, it's too sweaty. Like, I don't like using shovels. You just never know. So I highly recommend doing this sooner than later, especially if you want to conduct field work in your future as in your career or as a graduate student. So once I came to UF, I started off doing my master's research in 2017, and I moved a little bit further south than I did my field research in undergrad, and here was specifically in Moquegua, Peru. So if you were to continue at UF and specifically wanted to work in southern Peru, UF has a really good partnership with the Museo Contasuyo that is in Moquegua, Peru. And through that museum, there are a lot of different opportunities to be able to conduct field work, including working in the lab in the museum, as well as being able to work work in the field. So specifically what my research was focused on for my master's was actually taking core samples of a spring. So in my undergrad degree, I was both a geology and an anthropology major. And so being able to interact with the natural environment is really important to me, as well as understanding how the natural environment and humans kind of interacted in the past and influenced each other in different ways. So here I am taking cores of a spring that is at the base of a bunch of agricultural fields. So understanding the impact that humans have had on this natural system, how they've shaped the landscape, and were able to use it to support themselves. Because one of the things that is very distinct about southern Peru is it's super dry. So any access to fresh water is super important. And it turned out that not only was a spring important in the past, but it was also in use today. And a local farmer was not only using the agricultural fields that were several hundred years old and continuing to reuse those in the present, as well as using the spring to actually feed their, or to nourish their animals that were also grazing on this field. From there, I moved even farther south, so I just keep going. Maybe someday I'll end up in Chile, I don't know. But at this point, I'm still in southern Peru, and I moved to closer to the coast and actually Ilo. And so this is the research that I'm currently working on now, and it's been spread out over a couple of different field seasons. The first one was in the summer of 2019, and I specifically was looking at El Nino events and flooding events and the way that those impacted people in the past. So I began by actually working through looking at different sediment samples. And so it's a little hard. Can you guys see kind of the different layers that are going on in the stratigraphy here? So each of those, some of them are actually big debris flow layers. And so what a debris flow is actually not only just floodwaters, but a bunch of like mud and rocks and rubble and stuff that comes down from the highlands and comes down to the coast and can create a lot of destruction. So I started off with survey work. And so when I was starting to conduct my dissertation research, I knew that it needed to be in different phases because of the requirements of the Ministry of Culture in Peru. So whenever you work in a foreign country, it's especially important to understand what the different political systems are that are in place in order to kind of manage the research and whatever permissions that you might need. So in southern Peru, if you're working on anything related to archaeology, you'll go through the Ministry of Culture and you have to get certain permits and permissions to be able to do that work. So in order to do that, I started with a survey and some mapping to understand where I might want to excavate and where I might want to conduct my research. From there, I went on to the summer of 2022, because COVID slowed everything down and I wasn't able to go. So it was a big hiatus, but in the summer of 2022, I had my permits. The excavations had been approved, and I actually started to do my field work that I'm writing up currently that include not only mapping, but excavation and then analysis of any of the artifacts that were pulled out of the ground from there. One of the things that I do also is mapping with a drone, as well as the little kind of tripod looking thing is a total station, as well as pulling out artifacts, including ceramic material, lithic material, faunal bones, all sorts of things that could tell me and give me a little bit more insight into the things that people were doing in the past. And then my final little chunk of research was actually done this January. We were just taking pollen samples. These samples had to be approved separate from the excavations because it's a slightly different process that I won't go into. So that was done, and that was the conclusion of my actual field research, as well as doing a little bit more mapping. As I came home, looked at my results, I realized that I had missed a couple things and was able to go back into the field. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the resources that I know for anthropology as terms of doing field work. I'm not sure if any of you guys are anthropologists or thinking about doing research in anthropology, but this is kind of the chunk of knowledge that I personally have. I think if I just click on these, do you think it will go straight to them? Okay. Hopefully we are all going to be looking at the same things. So specifically at UF, we have a page dedicated to study abroad in field schools. These are not just for archaeology, but these are for anthropology as well. And so one of the field schools that I think their deadline is actually coming up pretty quick, but so far, since Dr. Prieto has been here, he's done this most years, but it is a field school in Peru. It's on the north coast of Peru, so in a slightly different place, obviously, than I work. And it's a really interesting site where you not only get to excavate archaeological materials, but also get into some burials, if that's something that you're interested in. If you're thinking about going into bioarchaeology or even biological anthropology, if you want some field work, getting to actually interact with burials and human remains. And so I think, let's see, I think it might be closed at this time, but they've been doing it pretty continuously each year. And so it's always good to kind of check out and see what those deadlines are so that you have them ahead of time. And then let me see. Another good resource is the American Anthropological Association. So some of you might be aware of different professional organizations that are within your field now, but you definitely will be aware of them once you become a graduate student, if that's something that you want to do. And a lot of times these professional organizations will have different websites where you can look for internships, jobs, field works, those types of things. So the American Anthropological Association is a big one in our field, and it has a guide where you can search for different fields, school opportunities in the different subfields of anthropology. So it's a very good resource and a good starting place, especially if you're not going to do something through UF, to be able to look elsewhere for those opportunities. Another one is this website. Let me make sure this is the one I'm about to talk about. Yeah, the Archaeological Fieldwork Opportunities Bulletin from the Archaeological Institute of America. This one's really nice. I really love maps because I'm an archaeologist and I think they're awesome. And it's really nice because you can click on the field opportunities based upon a certain region that you want to work. So I know, like, when I was an undergrad, I took a class in the archaeology of Peru, and that's what it made me want to actually go there. And so when I started looking for opportunities, I was looking for things within the country of Peru, and maps like this were really helpful to be able to narrow it down. Otherwise, it can be a little overwhelming sometimes to just see like a huge list of all of these different field schools. And then finally, this is the program that I specifically used. So it's called the Institute for Field Research, and they have a pretty comprehensive list of different field schools as well. The other great thing about IFR Global is that they also, anyway, you can kind of limit these to your different specializations, your discipline, and get a good feel for what these different field schools look like. So this one's kind of cool. If anyone is scuba certified, you can get a sense of the prerequisites, the overview, course details. It gives you the tuition amount. And so all of this is included in one page, which is really helpful, as well as the syllabus. The other thing that the Institute for Field Research also does is they do offer some scholarships, which is really helpful because I know when I was undergrad, it was really overwhelming to look at the cost of not only plane tickets, but, you know, taking courses over the summer or anything. And so it's also a good resource to be able to look for ways to help you pay for those field experiences that you might want to do, so that you can have those opportunities to go abroad if you want them. Cool. And then, so those are the programs that I know of. And so I guess I will switch gears and go back to y'all and then answer questions, or do you want me to go and answer questions now?
The next question is just answering questions. So.
Okay, so we can go ahead and open up to questions. Questions for me. I don't really know too much about specifically all the programs that are UF, but if you have any questions about field research in general or my experiences, I'm happy to answer them. Yeah.
Why did you decide to go abroad instead of just staying internally in the US?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like I said, when I was an undergrad, it was a pretty small department, but we did have a variety of classes that taught us about archaeology of different regions of the world. So I took one in Peru, about Peru. I took one about Mexico. I took one that talked about Israel specifically. And so as I was like reading through the different materials and the textbooks and different stuff, I really got kind of hooked on the archaeology of Peru specifically. Another thing that I really was interested in when it came to Peru, because I was a geologist also, the South coast of Peru and just Peru in general is very prone to a lot of different natural disasters. It's along the western coast is like a tectonic boundary. There's a lot of flood events. And so for me, being able to understand what the relationship was between people and the disasters that happened in the past, that was like a research interest that was really interesting to me. And so being able to do that in Peru was really helpful. Also, Peru, especially the South Coast, has really good preservation. So like if you dig in Florida, there is preservation, but like in Peru, I remember my first field school, when we were excavating different things, you find like textiles, like old like shirts and things. You find sometimes even like preserved, this is like a little gross, but you like can find preserved like soft tissues and skin on like in burials and things. And so being able to have such a abundant record was also really appealing to me as well. Other questions? Yeah.
What are like some of the implications of working with another country? Like how do you definitely kind of be mindful of the culture and
Yeah.
like help with the action to demonstrate that.
Yeah, for sure. So the first time I went to Peru, I had taken a couple of Spanish classes in high school, but as you guys probably have experienced yourself, like language classes in at least at my high school were like not that great. And so I thought I knew Spanish, but like I definitely didn't know Spanish. And so that was like a big thing. The first time I went was a language barrier. And so that was a big motivation to learn more Spanish the next time I went. And so the first thing is understanding that language barrier. And one of the things I also found as you like travel in different regions, there's sometimes different like dialects and different ways that people speak. So that's definitely an adjustment. And I always find that my brain has to like calibrate, especially like after COVID, like recalibrating to like, oh, let me listen to things in another language was definitely really difficult the first like week or so that I was there. Another big thing is within Peru, like I said, you have to go through the Ministry of Culture. And one of the things that I really like about the Ministry of Culture is it kind of allows for a lot of collaboration because you are required to work with a Peruvian co-director. So that's someone who's like a licensed archaeologist that actually is from Peru. And that person is a great resource for understanding not only the archaeology, but also, you know, the culture, also having a leg in and knowing all the kind of logistics that go in with doing a project and getting the permits that you need. And so that is really helpful to have someone who's local, someone who's actually from the country, to kind of keep you grounded in the culture and like to also be able to collaborate and talk with about the things that you're seeing. And then one of the things that I experienced the last time I went to Peru in January was that there was right at the, I think it was like mid-December or so, there was a lot of political unrest and there was like a coup that went on and some unrest in the government. And that was definitely something to be mindful of being in touch with local news sources, really paying attention and not overstepping and being aware of the things that were going on politically in another country when you were going so that you can make smart decisions about how you were traveling and where you were traveling. Does that help answer?
Yes,
okay. Other questions? Yeah.
What's your favorite fieldwork experience?
Ooh, that's hard. I think it's probably I've had a lot of good ones, but I think like I'll go back to my original field school because, you know, when I first went, I was really nervous. I didn't know because it wasn't through my school. I didn't know anyone that was going to the program. So I just kind of flew to Lima and I was like, hope this works out. And so when I got there, I was very nervous. I had not done any field work. I just like studied archaeology in a textbook. And we were excavating a temple mound. And so the way that the temple mound was structured is that it had several different tiers. And it had been going on for several different summers. And so we were working on one of the tiers that specific summer. And I think it was about the last like 2 or 3 weeks or so, I got moved to a different unit and it was working at the base of this. Let me see if it's in the photo. Okay. I think you can probably see it. It's starting to be back though, but there's like a staircase that goes like down the middle. And so I was digging at the base of the staircase and I was like, oh, it's just gonna be like a staircase. And so I'm like digging and digging. And at the base of the staircase was a like cache of decorated like pottery. And so they were beautifully painted. They actually like went back together. You could like cross mend them. And so at one time had been like a beautiful vessel and unfortunately it had been broken. But it was one of those moments where you like pull it up out of the ground and you're like, oh my gosh, like this is so beautiful. This is why we do this, to like get an insight into the things that people did in the past, to understand their artistry, to understand their worldviews. And it was just kind of a big moment of just like, oh, wow, like, I can't believe that this is here. And what I thought was just like a staircase was so much more. And so I think that's probably like the moment that I was like, yep, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. Yeah.
How was your experience different from like going to like a field school versus like when you did it yourself and started your master's research?
Yeah. So when I went to field school, like I said, I just kind of hopped on a plane and I was like, all right, I'm ready to dig. I showed up with like field clothes and I had my trowel, which is like, I was very excited about to finally have my own trowel. But I just kind of went and he pointed to where I would dig. I was put in a unit and, you know, kind of instructed on how to set up the unit, but it was pretty chill because for the most part, I was just kind of following directions. When I went to do my master's and my PhD research, there was just, somewhat aware, but also surprised by just how much work goes into like pre-planning doing the research, especially not only thinking about like, okay, what do I want to do as a researcher, but also like, what are some of the restrictions of the field site I'm working at? What are some monetary restrictions? Because when I went to field school, you do like pay for the program or pay for the credit hours that you get. But I didn't have to worry about like, how am I going to pay for food? How am I going to pay the people that are helping me excavate? How am I going to pay for the analysis of the things that are coming out of the ground? And so there was definitely a lot more to think about. And typically, I think with my master's, I didn't have to do as much pre-planning because it's a much smaller project. But with my PhD, I started planning months in advance. And specifically in order to get like permits and stuff, it typically takes 3 or 4 months to get those approved. And so there's probably like a couple months of like writing them in beforehand, finding your co-director, getting that all set, and then you submit it to Ministry of Culture and have to go through that whole approval process as well. So it requires a lot more pre-planning and a lot about just like thinking through things like details that you didn't really imagine, like getting health insurance. Like there was just a lot of things that are like required that I didn't really realize. And so it didn't necessarily make it more stressful, but it definitely made it more rewarding at the end because I was like, oh, I planned all this, and there was definitely hiccups like throughout it, but overall it went really smoothly. So yeah, so definitely a lot more pre-planning for sure, and a little bit less relaxing than when I went to field school. Other questions?
What was it like working with the Ministry of Culture? Like, was that something you knew before you even start, or was that not there and then that was that person? That kind of thing?
Yeah, so I didn't have to meet with, so there's the main office of the Ministry of Culture is located in Lima, which is the capital. And then they have like satellite offices throughout the country. And so when I had to find a co-director, and my co-director was actually a friend of a friend. And she did a lot of the coordination with the Ministry of Culture in Lima. So like I would like send her maps and documents and things, and she would make sure they were all in the right format. And she was the one that actually had to do the submission because she's the one that's actually licensed to work in the country. And then from there, once we got those permits approved, it's definitely always interesting because I think when you're like waiting to get your permits approved, you get like a lot more anxious and impatient. But it does take a while for them to review your maps, to like think through other projects that have been done in the area. And so once they're approved, you get those permits. And then most of the interactions that you actually have with the Ministry of Culture, in my experience, was the Ministry of Culture that was closest to my site. And so once they had those permits and I had the permits in hand, there was like scheduled visits to the site. And so the guy's name was Willie, but so Willie would come and visit us like partway through the project to make sure our excavations were going well, make sure we weren't like violating in the terms of our permits. And then at the end, he came to make sure that we had not done any more that we said we had done, as well as that we had backfilled the units. And so once you actually dig out a site, unlike the big sites like Machu Picchu and stuff, usually you have to actually fill them back in, which is the worst part of doing archaeological field work, because you just dug it all up and then you have to put all the dirt back in the hole, and it's just the worst. But you do the backfilling to actually like preserve the site and to make sure you're not doing extra damage to the area. And so then he would come and visit, and then you would sign it off. So overall, like my interactions went very smoothly, but it definitely was really important to have my co-director Gabriella with me because she had done this before. This was my first time really interacting with the Ministry of Culture once she came on the project, and she helped it go a lot more smoothly because she understood all of the different like nuances of the ministry and all the different formattings and things that were required. So I'm very thankful to her because I think navigating on my own would have been a pain in the butt. Other questions? Cool. Well, I can definitely like leave y'all with my email or something, and I can send you those links too if you think it would be helpful. And you guys are welcome to email me. Again, I am almost done, but I'll definitely be here at least through like the beginning of August. So if you have any questions or concerns about fieldwork or just want to know a little bit more about archaeology, I'm always happy to answer those. So thank you.